This story, the one you're about to hear, isn't just about a bully and a so-called weird classmate. No, it's much bigger than that. It's about what happens when cruelty meets courage, and then power walks into the room. I'm talking about a moment when a classroom drama turned into something national. When someone in power stepped in, not from behind a screen or a podium, but in real life. Yes, you read that right. This story ends with the governor stepping into a middle school classroom.
But why?
And what did they say that had the entire school silent in disbelief? Stick with me, because by the end of this video you're going to understand exactly why this happened, and trust me, it's not what you think. Before we get deep into it, I want you to take a second and really think about this. Have you ever been called weird? Has someone ever singled you out because you didn't quite fit their mold of what's normal? Maybe you dress differently. Maybe you speak with passion when others are trying to play it cool. Maybe you love things that the world thinks are uncool. If any of this feels familiar, then you're going to see yourself in the story. And even if you were never that kid, maybe you were just a bystander, or maybe you were the one doing the teasing, this story is going to challenge the way you think about power, perception, and what it really means to stand out. Now, I know the internet is full of crazy titles and dramatic thumbnails. But here's the thing. I'm not here to waste your time. This isn't clickbait. That moment with the governor? It happened. And you're going to see why, how, and what went down when it all unfolded. Because there's a deeper message buried inside this real-life classroom drama, and if you stick with me, I promise you, it's going to hit home in ways you didn't expect. Let me take you back to the beginning. The school is Lincoln Middle, located in a quiet suburb outside Atlanta, Georgia. It's a typical Tuesday. The halls echo with footsteps, lockers slam, and the smell of cafeteria pizza drifts faintly through the air. Students are moving between classes, most with their heads down, scrolling on phones, earbuds in, locked into their own worlds. And in room 214, something is about to happen that no one in the entire building is prepared for. Sitting near the window, halfway through second period, is a 7th grader named Evan. Now, Evan's not like the other kids, and that's the first thing anyone will tell you. He's got this wild curiosity that makes teachers either love him or feel completely exhausted. He asks questions, not just about the lesson, but about life. About how the school system works, about why rules exist, about what happens if you break them in a way that helps someone. He's not loud, but his mind is. He wears the same hoodie nearly every day, covered in patches from things like science fairs, coding camps, and a random chess tournament from 2 years ago. His hair is always a little too messy. His notebook is packed with drawings that look like they belong in a comic book. The kid is brilliant, but that's not always a compliment in middle school. Then there's Mason. He's everything you expect in a popular kid. Tall, confident, walks with that casual swagger that says, "Yeah, I run this place." He's got a crew of 3 or 4 other boys who orbit around him like moons around a planet. Mason's the type who always knows the right thing to say to a teacher to make them laugh, and the wrong thing to say to a classmate to make them feel small. He's not the kind of bully who shoves kids into lockers, but he's more dangerous. His words sting longer than bruises last. And today, he's about to pick the wrong target at the worst possible time. The class is buzzing with whispers and energy because there's a rumor going around. Someone important is visiting the school. No one knows who. Some say it's the district superintendent. Others say it's someone from the mayor's office. But no one expects what's really coming. The teacher, Ms. Halloran, is trying to keep the class focused. They're supposed to be doing a presentation on Community Heroes, a unit designed to teach kids about people who make a difference. One by one, students go up to present their slideshows: firefighters, veterans, local doctors. Some are nervous. Some rush through it. Then it's Evan's turn. He stands up slowly, not with nerves, but with purpose. He walks to the front of the room, opens his laptop, and begins. But his hero isn't someone from TV, or even someone famous. His hero is his older brother, Micah, a young man who was born with autism, struggled through the school system, but now works as a software engineer at a major tech company. Evan talks about Micah's challenges, about how people used to call him weird, how even teachers gave up on him. But he also shares how Micah never gave up on himself. How he built an app that helps nonverbal kids communicate. how he inspired Evan to never apologize for thinking differently. And that's when Mason laughs. Loudly. Not just a chuckle, a full, mocking laugh that echoes in the room. Weird, he says under his breath, but just loud enough for everyone to hear. Guess weird runs in the family. The room falls silent. Evan pauses. He doesn't lash out. He doesn't cry. He simply stares at Mason with a calmness that unsettles everyone more than if he had screamed. But before anyone can say anything else, there's a knock at the classroom door. Ms. Halloran walks over, expecting it to be another teacher or a hall monitor. But when she opens it, her face changes instantly. The room goes dead quiet. Standing there, with a small security detail and a crisp navy blue suit, is Governor Alana Reed. Yes, the actual governor of Georgia. She steps into the room with a warm but commanding presence that instantly silences even the most restless student. No one knows why she's here. No one knows what she's about to say. But when her eyes scan the room and lock onto Evan, everything changes. Now you're probably thinking, what's a governor doing in a random 7th grade classroom in the middle of the week? Why does she seem to know Evan? And more importantly, what is she about to say in front of this whole class that will leave not just the bullies speechless, but the entire school buzzing for weeks? You want answers? Good. Because you're about to get them. But don't blink and don't click away, because the next part of the story is where everything gets real. And by the time we're done, you're going to see just how powerful one voice can be, especially when the world tries to silence it. The classroom seemed frozen in time. Evan stood at the front, halfway through his presentation, and every set of eyes was now darting between him and the woman who had just walked in, the governor of Georgia. Whispers started swirling, soft and rapid, like wind rustling leaves before a storm. No one dared speak loud enough to be heard, but the energy in the room had shifted into something electric, something heavy with questions. Ms. Halloran's lips were slightly parted, as if she, too, was processing the impossible. The governor didn't make school visits like this, especially not unannounced, and definitely not in the middle of a routine civics class at a public middle school. The security guard stayed just outside the door, allowing her to step forward, her heels clicking lightly against the tile floor as she moved with the calm assurance of someone used to walking into rooms that stop spinning when she enters. Evan didn't flinch. His posture remained composed, but something flickered behind his eyes. It wasn't fear, it was closer to awareness. As if, for reasons unknown to everyone else, he had been expecting something. Not this exactly, but something. The kind of unspoken anticipation that builds in a person who knows a secret no one else in the room even suspects exists. She gave a slight nod in his direction, acknowledging him not like a stranger, but like someone she recognized. That simple gesture sent a new ripple through the class. Mason's smirk faded into confusion, and his group of friends exchanged quick, uncertain glances. The power dynamic had shifted so sharply it left the air almost too thick to breathe. No one said it out loud, but everyone was thinking the same thing. Why is the governor looking at him like that? To understand what brought them all to this moment, you have to rewind the clock, maybe not far, just a few weeks back. That's when Evan started doing things that, in hindsight, didn't seem like much at the time, but now carry a strange, almost cinematic weight. He'd been spending less time with his usual few friends, kids who shared his love for computers, sketching, and late-night deep dives into conspiracy theory YouTube rabbit holes, and more time alone in the school library. Not reading fiction or textbooks, but pulling up obscure public documents, government reports, and academic journals that most middle schoolers would scroll past like spam pop-ups. He'd been asking questions too, not just to teachers but to the front office staff, the janitor, even the cafeteria manager. And not regular kid questions. He wanted to know about budget allocations, about why certain programs had been cut, about who approved new surveillance cameras in the hallways. And every time someone brushed him off, he wrote something down in a little leather-bound journal he carried everywhere. It wasn't just curiosity, it was investigative. And though no one took it seriously at the time, now, in the context of a governor walking into his classroom mid-presentation, all of it felt like clues that had been hiding in plain sight. His teachers, especially Ms. Halloran, had noticed changes too. Evan's projects had grown more ambitious, his writing sharper, more analytical, like he was building something, maybe a thesis, maybe a case. And yet, when asked, he downplayed it. Said it was just for fun, just ideas he was toying with. But you could tell there was more. One day, he stayed after class and asked Ms. Halloran something strange. Do you think truth ever gets too loud for people to ignore, even if they pretend not to hear it? She had smiled, thinking it was just another one of his philosophical musings, the kind that made grading papers feel like decoding riddles. But now she remembered that question like a flashing neon sign. At home, things weren't any less complicated. Evan's parents had been distant lately, not neglectful, just preoccupied. His mother worked night shifts as a nurse. His father had recently lost his job and was spending more time in the garage than in the living room. His older brother, Micah, whom Evan admired deeply, had been going through a rough patch. While Micah was brilliant, holding down his software engineering job and mentoring kids on the autism spectrum, he had recently been targeted online for developing an app that exposed unethical data collection practices in school-issued learning devices. The story hadn't made major headlines, but it was big enough to trend briefly on Twitter, and there were rumors that companies were quietly pressuring his employer to fire him. Evan had watched it all unfold from the sidelines, his brother's struggle becoming the silent fuel behind his growing obsession with truth, transparency, and the abuse of power, especially when it targeted those who were already marginalized. And here's where things get even stranger. About a week before the governor showed up, Evan had submitted an anonymous op-ed to the local newspaper. It never made print, but it caught the attention of someone. The piece was eloquent, piercing, and deeply informed. It criticized a recent school board decision that had slashed funding for special education programs while funneling thousands of dollars into cosmetic campus upgrades that happened to be managed by a firm owned by one of the board members' cousins. The article cited public records, campaign donation trails, and audit summaries, details far too specific and well-organized for any seventh grader to have compiled alone. The editorial board passed it up the chain, unsure if it was a prank, a whistleblower, or something else entirely. A few days later, someone from the governor's office requested the unedited submission. No one knew what to make of it.
Until today.
The question was no longer just, why is the governor here? The question now was, what does she know about Evan? And how long had she known it? But just when things start to connect, another twist reveals itself, one that turns the entire theory on its head. Because the governor wasn't alone in arriving at the school today. Security footage would later show that her motorcade had arrived nearly an hour earlier than expected, and she had spent nearly 40 minutes in the principal's office in a heated, closed-door conversation. Whatever they discussed hadn't gone smoothly. Principal Swenson, normally composed, almost smug, was seen pacing, agitated, and red-faced. Some students claimed they overheard the word cover-up. Others said they saw a man in a gray suit leave the office looking pale and shaking. The man wasn't from the governor's staff, at least not publicly. His car had government plates, but not from Georgia. Someone said it looked like a federal tag, but no one could confirm. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about a kid standing up to a bully. It was beginning to look like something far more tangled, far more dangerous. Still, the pieces don't fully add up. Evan hadn't told anyone about the op-ed, not his friends, not his family, not even Micah. So how did it reach the highest office in the state? And more importantly, why was the governor walking into this classroom, in the middle of this moment, just as Evan was being mocked for defending his brother? Theories began to swirl. Some students thought Evan was being rewarded, that the governor had come to recognize him publicly for something incredible. Others whispered that he was in trouble, that maybe he'd hacked into something he wasn't supposed to, or had exposed something big that made powerful people nervous. A few even said the whole thing was staged, that the governor was part of some viral social experiment to raise awareness about bullying, that Evan was in on it the whole time. But none of those theories explained the look on Mason's face. A look that had transformed from smug superiority to a deep, uneasy fear, as if he had just realized he wasn't the biggest voice in the room anymore. And that's where things really begin to unravel. Because just as the governor opened her mouth to speak, a voice crackled through the classroom intercom. It wasn't the usual morning announcement's voice. It was a distorted, garbled message that broke through for only a few seconds. Most of the students barely registered what it said. But Evan heard it. So did the governor. And their eyes met in a way that said everything without saying a word. Because whatever that voice had said, it wasn't meant for the class.
It was meant for them.
And just like that, the next layer of mystery began to unfold. The moment the distorted voice crackled through the intercom, a strange stillness settled over the classroom. It lasted only a few seconds, and most students brushed it off as a glitch in the system. But to Evan and to the governor, it felt like a code. A warning. A signal. The kind of eerie, out-of-place event that tells you someone is listening who shouldn't be. And just like that, whatever sense of control Evan might have had over this situation evaporated. Because for the first time since she walked into the room, the governor's expression shifted, not in fear, but in concern, as if she suddenly realized this wasn't going to go according to plan. She motioned discreetly to Ms. Halloran, whispered something that was too quiet for anyone to catch, and just like that, the teacher nodded and dismissed the class 20 minutes early. Students filed out, buzzing with theories, barely able to contain their excitement about what they'd just witnessed. But Evan wasn't allowed to leave. Neither was Mason. The door closed behind the last student, and now it was just the three of them, plus Ms. Halloran, who looked like she'd just been pulled into a conversation way above her pay grade. That's when the governor finally turned to Evan and said something no one expected. "You've been looking in the right places, but you're not the only one." She reached into her coat and pulled out a manila envelope. Thick, worn at the edges, and unmarked. She handed it to Evan with both hands, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made even Mason sit still. "This was mailed to my office anonymously. No return address. Just your name written in block letters. Evan Marsh. No explanation, no contact information, just a pile of printed emails, invoices, and security footage. Some of it matches what you hinted at in that article. But some of it goes much deeper." Evan opened the envelope slowly, careful not to let anything slide out. Inside was exactly what she said, evidence. And not just of school budget corruption, but of something far worse. There were flagged internal emails between school board members referencing donor compliance, payments from private corporations, and strange references to behavioral data points being harvested through the school's new learning software. There were grainy screenshots of classroom cameras that had been installed under the pretense of student safety, but the footage was being forwarded to servers with out-of-state IP addresses. There was even a memo about targeting neurodivergent students for experimental learning metrics, students like Evan and his brother Micah. But before Evan could flip through more than a few pages, the governor raised a hand. "I don't know how deep this goes.
I don't know who's involved.
But the moment I started asking questions, someone tried to wipe this from our records. What you're holding doesn't exist anywhere else. Which means you're now holding something very dangerous." And then, like clockwork, it began. That night, Evan got home to find his backpack had been torn open. The journal he always carried, his personal record of everything he'd uncovered, was missing. No forced entry. No signs of a break-in. Just the one thing taken that could tie everything together. He asked his parents, but they hadn't seen anything. They assumed maybe he left it at school. But Evan knew better. That journal never left his side. Someone had been watching. Someone had gotten close enough to him, close enough to know what to take, without leaving a trace. And just like that, the momentum he'd been building slipped through his fingers. For the first time, he felt vulnerable, exposed. The next day at school, things got weirder. Ms. Halloran was out. Personal leave, according to the substitute. When Evan tried to bring up the governor's visit, the other students seemed confused. Some claimed they remembered it. Others said they never saw her at all. Mason refused to talk about it altogether, but there was something off about him. He looked haunted, like he'd seen something he couldn't unsee. Evan tried to question him during lunch, but Mason gave him a cold, flat stare and said, "You should stop. Seriously. Before you find out something you can't unknow." That wasn't a warning, it was a threat. And it wasn't the first one. Later that week, Evan received an anonymous message on his school Chromebook. Not an email, not a text. It appeared like a pop-up window, Just 5 words in white text over a black screen. You're asking the wrong questions. No name. No source. It disappeared before he could screenshot it. He took the laptop to the school tech support, but the student assistant behind the desk, Noah Richardson, acted strange when Evan explained what happened. Noah was a senior, known around school as a coding prodigy. He wore noise-canceling headphones most days, and rumor had it he'd already been offered a job with a cybersecurity firm straight out of high school. But when Evan asked him if it was possible to trace where the message came from, Noah didn't say yes or no. He just looked at Evan for a long moment and muttered, "You're not the only one watching," before walking away. It was a cryptic response, but it made something click in Evan's mind. Maybe Noah wasn't just another tech nerd. Maybe he knew something. Maybe he'd seen something in the school's network traffic logs, something he wasn't allowed to talk about. Or maybe he was part of it. That's the problem with chasing the truth. It becomes hard to tell the difference between a warning and a trap. Evan didn't know whether to confront him or keep his distance, but either way, he had to keep moving. Evan tried to contact the governor's office again, hoping for clarity, for backup, anything, but every call led to a different aide who couldn't comment on individual student matters. The woman who had looked him dead in the eye and told him he wasn't alone?
Gone.
No trace of a visit. No mention of her being at the school in official state calendars. It was as if the entire moment had been erased from reality. Then, just when it seemed like every lead was dead and the walls were closing in, Evan received something unexpected, an envelope in his school locker. No name, no address, just a note clipped to the front with one sentence. It wasn't your brother they were after. And that changes everything. Because up until that point, Evan believed all of this was about Micah, his story, his app, the way it exposed the darker side of data collection in schools. But this note suggests there's more. That the real target, the real threat, might not have been Micah at all. It might have been Evan.
But why?
That question is where we'll pick up next. Because once Evan realizes the truth isn't just something he's chasing, but something he is, the game changes completely. And so do the rules. Evan stared at the note clipped to the envelope as if it might reveal something more if he just looked hard enough. It wasn't your brother they were after. That single line had upended everything. Up until now, the dots had connected in one direction: Micah's whistleblowing, the app, the backlash, the surveillance, the school board corruption. It all felt like a chain reaction ignited by Micah's brave stand. But if Micah wasn't the intended target, then Evan had been walking through this entire storm with the wrong map in hand. That shift in perspective hit him hard. It meant someone had been watching him long before he even realized he was part of the game. And if that was true, then nothing was as it seemed. He tucked the envelope into his jacket and walked out into the hallway, trying to keep his mind calm, but everything around him suddenly felt sharper, more distorted, like the walls themselves were aware. He couldn't shake the paranoia. Who knew what? Who had planted the note? And why now? His locker was one of the few places only he had access to. Or so he thought. As he rounded the corner toward the science wing, he saw something that made his chest tighten. A girl crouched by another locker, slipping a small envelope into the crack between the locker door and the frame. She moved quickly, like someone who'd done this before. Evan recognized her immediately, Isabel. A quiet girl from his English class. Barely ever spoke, always in the back row, sketching in her notebook while the class discussed Lord of the Flies or The Outsiders. She didn't look up, didn't notice Evan watching. But the moment she turned to leave, he spotted the same handwriting on her envelope. That same exact blocky lettering. He waited until she was gone, then approached the locker she had targeted. It wasn't his. It belonged to Avery Tran, one of the most well-connected kids in school, captain of the robotics team, student council treasurer, and daughter of one of the school board members. Avery wasn't someone Evan interacted with often. Their worlds didn't overlap. But this changed everything. He waited outside the classroom until she came by between periods and approached her carefully, not wanting to spook her. He kept it vague, just asked if she'd received anything unusual lately. At first, she gave him the typical cold shoulder, but when he mentioned Isabel by name, something flickered in her eyes. She didn't confirm anything, but she didn't deny it either. Instead, she whispered, "Don't ask questions if you're not ready for the answers," then walked away without another word. That warning echoed the same language Mason had used. And that's when Evan realized something chilling. These cryptic messages, the threats, the missing journal, they weren't random. They were coordinated,
Timed.
calculated, which meant there was a pattern, and possibly a second operation running underneath the one he thought he was exposing. Later that evening, Evan received a text from an unknown number. Just a photo. It was grainy, clearly zoomed in from a distance, but he recognized the image immediately. It was Isabel, sitting in the back row of the school board meeting from last month, wearing a dark hoodie and scribbling something into a notepad. What was she doing there? That meeting wasn't open to the public, not officially. Evan had watched the live stream afterward when he was gathering research for his article. But Isabel had been there in person. The message that followed the image was even more disturbing. She's not who you think she is. Now the story twisted in a way Evan hadn't prepared for. Was Isabel a friend? A spy? A warning system? Was she the one leaving the notes? Or just the messenger for someone else? And if she had access to school board meetings, what else had she been watching? What role was she really playing in all this? Driven by a need to know more, Evan started digging into her digital footprint. Nothing unusual surfaced. No social media, no photos, no personal blog posts. Almost too clean for a modern teenager. But in a comment thread buried under an old video from a school's robotics team channel, Evan found a strange interaction. Isabel had commented once, using a username that didn't match any of her usual school logins. The comment read, "Some systems are designed to watch you watch them." It had only one reply from another anonymous user. "But some are designed to bait you." That's when the air in Evan's room turned cold. Because those weren't just weird musings, they were messages. The kind of cryptic exchanges you'd expect from whistleblowers or undercover operatives. Only now they were happening between two high school students. Or at least people posing as students. Still trying to make sense of it all, Evan did something risky. He approached Noah again. This time in the tech lab after hours. The room was quiet, humming with the soft whir of idle computers. Noah didn't even look up when Evan walked in. "You're getting closer," he said without preamble. Evan asked what he meant, and Noah leaned back in his chair, cracking his knuckles slowly before responding. "Avery got her note too, right?" Evan nodded. "So did I," Noah added. "And probably more of us than we realize. Whoever's doing this, they're building something. A map, maybe. Or a warning system. But not everyone who receives a message is on the same side." That confession confirmed Evan's growing suspicion. This wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a chess game with real players on opposite sides of the board, and he didn't even know which pieces were allies or pawns. But before Evan could press for more, Noah leaned in, lowered his voice, and said something that nearly made Evan's blood freeze. Micah didn't build that app alone. He had help. From inside the school. That one sentence shattered everything Evan thought he knew about his brother's story. Who helped him? Why wasn't it ever mentioned? And more importantly, what happened to that person? Noah wouldn't say more. He stood up, unplugged his laptop, and walked out, leaving Evan alone with a storm of questions that now stretched far beyond school politics or surveillance data. This was about connections, choices, and secrets buried so deep even those closest to them didn't know they existed. But just as Evan gathered his things to leave, a loud ping echoed from the nearest computer, one he hadn't touched. The screen lit up with a video file labeled only, Marsh_prototyped v1. His hands trembled as he clicked to open it. And that's where everything begins to spiral, because what he sees next doesn't just shift the narrative, it redefines it completely. The video file opened to a dark screen, illuminated only by flickering data logs and timestamps. At first, Evan didn't understand what he was looking at. The footage was from a classroom camera, angle fixed, audio slightly distorted, timestamp marked from nearly a year ago. But as the screen sharpened, Evan's breath caught in his throat. It was Micah. Not the Micah the world had seen on live streams, or the quiet brother who loved tinkering with open-source code. This was a version of Micah Evan didn't recognize. Shoulders tense, voice hushed, eyes darting nervously toward the corners of the room like he knew someone was watching. He was speaking to someone just off camera, someone the lens never captured, but whose shadow occasionally slipped into frame. Their conversation was muffled, but a few words were painfully clear. "They'll come after him next." Then silence. No context, no follow-up, just a cut to black. Then the screen flashed with static and shut itself off. Evan reached out to replay it, but the file had vanished. Not closed. Deleted. That's when he heard it. Soft footsteps in the hallway outside the lab. It was late. The school had been empty for at least an hour. He turned off the monitor, ducked under the desk instinctively, holding his breath. The steps were slow and deliberate, not rushed like a janitor or another student. They stopped right outside the door. A pause. A click, someone testing the handle. It didn't open. The door was locked. Another pause, longer this time, as if the person were listening. Then the footsteps moved on, fading down the corridor until they disappeared. Evan waited 2 more minutes before slowly crawling out from under the desk. His heartbeat was a drum in his ears, every nerve in his body tense. He packed his bag with shaking hands and slipped out through the back stairwell, checking behind him the entire time. He didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the house, every flicker of shadow against his window set him on edge. At one point, he even placed a chair under his bedroom doorknob, the way he'd seen in thriller movies. Paranoia had always felt like an exaggeration, until now. Because this wasn't some abstract digital trail he was following anymore. Someone had just tried the lab door less than a minute after he watched a video that didn't belong on any school server. Someone knew where he was and, more importantly, what he'd seen. The next morning, Evan came downstairs to find his mother pacing the kitchen, clutching her phone with a pale, shaken expression. He thought she'd found out about the video, or the envelope, or the broken lock on his journal. But it was something worse. "Have you heard from Mason?" she asked. Evan blinked. "No, why?" She handed him her phone. There was a message from Mason's mother, sent late the night before. "Mason didn't come home after school. His phone is off. Police say he may have just run away, but something feels wrong. Please let us know if you hear from him." The world shifted again. Mason was missing. The same Mason who told Evan to stop digging, who looked haunted after the governor's visit, who had been pulling away for weeks. Now he was gone. No explanation, no warning, and no trace. Evan immediately checked their message history. The last text from Mason was short and cryptic. "I think someone's watching you. Check your camera permissions. Don't trust Noah." Evan's skin went cold. He pulled up the permissions tab on his laptop and saw something he never expected. An unfamiliar app had been granted access to his camera and microphone. Not just once. Consistently. Over the last 6 weeks. The app had no name, no publisher, no visible icon. Just a string of code as its identifier. He deleted it immediately, but it was too late. He'd been watched, listened to, probably even recorded. And if Mason knew that, if Mason tried to warn him, maybe that's why he disappeared. With every answer, more questions surfaced like traps. Had Noah installed the spyware? Or was he trying to protect Evan in some twisted way? Was Isabel part of it, or a pawn like the rest of them? What was the video file trying to show, and who was the person just off camera with Micah? And then there was the governor. Why hadn't she followed up? Why was her visit scrubbed from every record? Who had the power to erase a state official's appearance from digital history? That's when Evan started noticing the white SUV, parked across the street from his house. No plates. Tinted windows. Different times, different spots, always the same car. It showed up again outside the library. Then outside the school parking lot. He mentioned it to his dad casually just to see if it was in his head. Probably a neighbor, his father said, barely looking up. But Evan wasn't convinced. Every time he tried to photograph it, it was gone before he could focus the lens. And now, he felt it constantly, the presence, the watchful eyes, the invisible pressure crawling along his spine. He wasn't just uncovering a mystery anymore. He was inside one. He knew he needed to go to the police, but how do you report shadows? How do you explain a conspiracy with no names, no clear suspects, and evidence that disappears the moment you try to show it? And after Mason's vanishing, would the cops even take it seriously? Or would that just put Evan next on the list? Alone in his room, lights off, laptop camera now taped over, Evan opened his brother's old files again, this time digging through hidden folders he'd avoided before. One was labeled Failsafe. Inside was a document with a single line of text: "If you're reading this, I'm gone. And you were always the real experiment." Evan's hands trembled.
Gone.
Real experiment. The phrase echoed like a warning in his mind, unraveling every truth he thought he knew. He thought he was chasing someone else's story. But maybe the real story was chasing him. And the scariest part? He had no idea WHYIT happened late one night, when Evan thought he'd reached a dead end. He hadn't slept properly in days. Between the SUV that kept appearing near his school, the missing files, the vanishing of Mason, and the cold weight of that single sentence from Micah's failsafe folder, "You were always the real experiment." He was unraveling. The paranoia had stopped being a feeling and turned into a constant state of existence. His thoughts had become a loop, cycling through what he thought he knew, trying to identify where he'd missed something. That's when he got the call. Not a text, not a voicemail. An actual call from a number that didn't register, just a string of zeros. Against every instinct, he answered it. The voice was masked, filtered with static, but not robotic.
Human.
Familiar even. "Check your brother's messages, 3 weeks before he disappeared," it said. "There's one you never saw. Look in the archive folder. Search by the word Corvus." Before Evan could respond, the line cut out. No way to redial. No trace of the call. He sprinted to his desk, dug up the backup drive from Micah's laptop, and began combing through the buried files. It took over an hour, sifting through endless subfolders and encrypted zips, but eventually, he found it, an archived text conversation hidden under a folder named System Boot Fail. He decrypted the file, and his stomach dropped. It was a private thread between Micah and someone saved only as Sparrow. The messages were strange at first, technical, full of code references, patterns, algorithms that Evan barely understood. But then the conversation turned, growing urgent. "They think I built it alone.
Let them."
Another message: "The real dataset isn't in the app. It's in him. He doesn't know." And finally, "Corvus will activate when the mirror breaks." The date of that message was exactly 1 day before Micah went missing. The words hit Evan like a freight train.
It wasn't about the app.
It was about him. Somehow, Micah had linked Evan to something deeper, something experimental. And then he vanished. That's when everything shifted, every clue reframed itself in his head. What if the reason Mason warned him, the reason Isabel was at that meeting, the reason Noah seemed to know too much, was because they all knew more about him than he did? What if Micah hadn't just been uncovering a corrupt system but protecting Evan from it? Desperate for answers, Evan tracked down the last person he ever thought he'd confide in, Noah. He cornered him in the back hallway after 7th period, demanded the truth. For a moment, Noah looked like he might walk away again. But then something in him broke. He leaned in, voice low and tight. "You weren't supposed to find the video."
Or the archive, he said.
Micah didn't trust anyone, but he needed someone to carry the failsafe if things went wrong. "He built it into you." Evan felt like the ground beneath him vanished. "What are you talking about?" Noah looked him straight in the eye. "You're not just part of the story, Evan. You're the key to it." Micah used behavioral feedback, passive biometrics, even eye-tracking data. He coded it into an interactive model. Every time you access certain files, he was mapping responses. Your patterns. Your instincts. It wasn't just about surveillance. It was predictive. You were the final test subject. It didn't make sense. Not completely. Not yet. But suddenly, the little things, the encrypted folders labeled with his birth date, the strange way certain files only opened when he clicked them, the eerie familiarity of the threats, they weren't random. They were designed. Evan's head spun. "So what? I've been part of an experiment this whole time? Micah was using me." Noah shook his head. "Not using. Protecting. You were the only person he trusted enough to hide the key inside. And now someone else knows that." Before Evan could press him for more, Noah's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, went pale. "We need to go."
Now. Why?
Because Sparrow just sent a final transmission. And Isabel's not Isabel. Evan froze. What do you mean? Noah's eyes locked onto his. She's not a student. She never was. It all came crashing down. Isabel, the quiet observer. The one who always sat in the back. The one who somehow slipped into school board meetings unnoticed. The one who left notes but never answered questions. She wasn't just suspicious, she was planted. A handler, an observer, a controller. And if that was true, then everything Evan had done in front of her, every emotional breakdown, every decision, was part of their data. As they rushed down the hallway toward the back exit, Evan's thoughts churned with betrayal and confusion. Nothing about this was what it seemed. The app wasn't just about privacy. The surveillance wasn't just political. The missing students weren't just runaways. The truth was bigger, older, deeper, something that stretched far beyond their town, their school, even their state. And just as they reached the exit, Noah stopped and turned to Evan with one last revelation. You know what Corvus means, right? Evan shook his head, barely able to speak. It's Latin, Noah said. For a raven, the one that never forgets. Then they pushed through the door, stepping into a night darker than either of them had ever imagined, as somewhere behind them, Isabel, or whoever she really was, finally made her move. They didn't sleep. There wasn't time. Evan and Noah holed up in the forgotten storage space beneath the old music wing, where no Wi-Fi reached and barely anyone remembered it existed. The flickering overhead light cast shadows that seemed to twist with every movement, but it was the only place they could talk without fear of being listened to. At least, that's what they hoped. Evan kept running through everything Noah had said about Corvus, about Isabel, about Micah using him as a behavioral mirror for a predictive model. It didn't feel like paranoia anymore. It felt like a trap he'd been born into without consent. Every part of his life, his choices, his reactions, even his fear, was possibly being monitored, mapped, and weaponized. He wanted to believe it wasn't true, but there were too many signs he could no longer ignore. And now that he'd seen the cracks, he couldn't unsee them. Then came the message. No number, no name, just a vibrating notification on Evan's burner phone. We need to talk. You know why. Meet me where it started. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was not. It was from Mason's account. The same Mason who was supposed to be missing. The same Mason whose last message had warned Evan not to trust Noah. But now, as Evan read the text over and over, something else twisted in his gut. If Mason was alive, then why hadn't he come home? Why reach out now, and why ask Evan to come alone? Noah was instantly on edge. You can't go. You don't know who actually sent that. Could be Isabel. Could be whoever's behind Corvus. You walk into that meeting alone, you might not walk out. But Evan couldn't let it go. If there was even a small chance Mason was out there, and not just another manipulated player in this horrifying game, he had to find out. He told Noah he needed space to think, stepped into the quiet night air outside the band hallway, and let the cold help him focus. That's when he saw her. His mom. Standing by her car in the parking lot. At first, it made no sense. She didn't know where he was, no one did. But there she was just waiting. As if she knew. He approached cautiously, confusion overtaking his fear. She looked different, tired, yes, but something else. Resigned. She didn't ask him why he'd been missing. She didn't yell or demand answers. Instead, she held out her phone. He contacted me too, she said. Micah. Weeks before he disappeared. Told me to protect you if anything happened to him. Evan froze. You knew. I didn't know everything, she said quietly, but I knew enough to know that pretending I didn't was the only way to keep you safe. Evan's voice cracked. You lied to me. I protected you, she said. Because if you had known too much too soon, they would have taken you, just like they took him. The pain hit like a freight train. The one person he thought was outside the storm, his own mother, had been silently playing her part in it. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. Micah told me to give this to you when the time was right. I think it's now. But Evan, if you open this, there's no going back. They'll know. They'll come.
He didn't take it.
Not yet. Because for the first time in his life, he didn't know whether the truth was worth the cost. Every answer so far had only led to more questions, more danger, more isolation. He was being forced to choose between his own safety and the full truth of whatever system had quietly built itself around him. And worse, if he kept going, he might not be able to save the people who were still left. Noah, Mason, even his mom. That's when the second message came through. This time it wasn't from Mason's account. It was a system ping, a direct signal, encrypted and embedded in one of the school's oldest digital databases, the one Micah had used for senior project backups. A single line of text, no sender. The real test begins tonight. Choose truth or loyalty. His chest tightened. This wasn't just about him anymore. Someone was forcing him to pick a side. Either he opened the envelope, found Mason, and faced whatever was waiting, or he stopped digging, walked away, protected the people he still cared about, and lived with the not knowing. But it wasn't that simple. Because every second he delayed, the shadowy system that had manipulated his life was still running, still learning, still evolving. Choosing loyalty might protect the people closest to him, but it might also doom countless others he'd never meet. He turned to his mom, who simply nodded. She wasn't going to push him. The choice had to be his. He looked down at the envelope. His hand shook. This was the point of no return. But just as he reached for it, a sound shattered the stillness behind them. Racing footsteps, panicked breath, and then Noah bursting through the doors, eyes wide with terror. "They found the lab," he gasped. "They wiped everything. We have to go now, they're coming." Before Evan could speak, headlights flared behind them. The white SUV, closer than ever.
No time to think.
No time to decide. Everything he'd been running from was finally here, staring him in the face. And the worst part? He still didn't know what side he was on. They ran. Not just because the white SUV was back, but because they now understood it had never left. It had always been watching from just far enough away to feel like paranoia. But this time, it was closing in, tires crushing gravel, headlights beaming through the fog like searchlights. Noah pulled Evan by the sleeve, shouting directions, barely breathing between words. Evan's mom peeled off in her car in the opposite direction, acting as a decoy, without hesitation. It wasn't until Evan turned back for a last glance that he realized she'd known this would happen. She wasn't improvising. She was executing a plan. That terrified him more than anything else. They ducked into the side alley near the back of the school, where Noah punched in a code on a rusted service door. The entrance led to a forgotten utility tunnel, one Micah had supposedly explored years ago when mapping out the school's old security infrastructure for a student council project. Only now Evan saw that it wasn't just a project. It had been preparation. Once inside, breathless and shaking, they slid the bolt shut and turned on a small emergency flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, revealing ancient brick, decayed pipes, and spray-painted symbols, ones that Evan remembered seeing in Micah's notebooks, but had never understood until now. It wasn't just a tunnel. It was a blueprint, a code. And at the center of it all was a single word that appeared again and again. Corvus. Noah, panting, looked Evan dead in the eye. "You need to understand something. This isn't just about your brother, or the school, or even the app. It goes higher. State level. Maybe national. They're building behavioral datasets, emotional blueprints, testing how people react under pressure, conflict, fear. They use students because no one watches them because they can manipulate environments without public scrutiny." Evan felt sick. "You're telling me this is some kind of experiment?" "No," Noah said, voice tight. "I'm telling you it's already been deployed." That's when the second betrayal hit. Harder than the first. From behind them, a slow clap echoed down the tunnel. Evan turned, flashlight trembling in his grip, as Isabel stepped into the beam, calm, composed, utterly unafraid. She didn't look like a student anymore. She looked like someone who'd been trained for moments like this. Someone who knew how to control fear. She held up her hands, not to surrender, but to signal that she was in charge now. "You were never supposed to make it this far," she said evenly, eyes flicking to Evan. "But I guess Micah was right. You're adaptive. Predictive modeling flagged you as a high-yield anomaly 6 months ago. The board wanted to pull the plug. I said we needed more data. Noah's hands curled into fists. You were using him. She tilted her head. No more than Micah did. Or your mother. Or any of the others. Evan couldn't move.
Couldn't speak.
Others? Isabel nodded. You think this is just your story? You think you're the only one Micah coded into the system? There are 27 nodes like you. Students. Subjects. Monitored in real time. Their behavior directly feeds into Corvus's central model, dictating policies, crafting targeted content, shaping social media algorithms, even influencing local legislation. It's not a simulation anymore. It's the foundation for the next stage of societal control. Noah stepped in front of Evan. Then why expose yourself now? Isabel smirked. Because we're past the data collection phase. It's implementation time. And Evan, you're not just the anomaly. You're the proof of concept. Your decisions, your panic, your defiance, it all built the narrative. You just didn't know you were writing it. That was when Evan saw it, something in her expression, in the cold calm of her voice. She wanted him to snap. She wanted him to break. Because the next layer of testing wasn't about privacy. It was about control. Behavioral weaponization. Manipulating dissent through personalized psychological warfare. And he'd played right into it. Every decision he'd made, every friend he'd confronted, every room he'd searched, every moment of doubt, they had all been mapped, predicted, even prompted. But just when it felt like everything was over, when Evan's knees were ready to give out and the light in the tunnel dimmed to nothing, another voice echoed through the dark. That's enough. A figure stepped into view, not from the tunnel's entrance, but from deeper within, out of the old maintenance shaft that had been sealed for decades. The figure was cloaked in a heavy parka, hood low, face shadowed. But Evan knew instantly. It was Mason.
Alive. Changed. Hardened.
He looked at Isabel and spoke without fear. You broke protocol coming here. That wasn't part of your directive. Isabel's smirk faded. You're not cleared to intervene. I cleared myself, Mason replied. Then his eyes turned to Evan. You're not the only one who woke up, little brother. Everything Evan thought he knew, every betrayal, every clue, every fragment of hope, exploded into 1,000 impossible directions. Mason wasn't missing. He had joined them. Or infiltrated them. Or maybe something even more dangerous. And now he was here, standing between Evan and the one person who held all the keys. Except he didn't look like he was here to save anyone. He looked like he was here to finish what Micah started. The tunnel seemed to close in around them, walls pulsing with tension, as if the very bricks had absorbed years of secrets. Evan couldn't move. Mason's presence twisted everything. His brother, the one person he'd spent sleepless nights searching for, the person whose absence had started this entire unraveling, wasn't a prisoner.
He was part of it.
And yet, something in Mason's eyes, something beneath the hardened expression, told Evan this wasn't black and white. Isabel stepped back, suddenly unsure. She'd calculated every outcome except this one. Mason was an anomaly even to them now, and that made him dangerous. Evan's voice cracked as he stepped forward. Why, Mason? Why didn't you come back? Mason exhaled slowly, the weight of his answer thick in the stale air. Because I had to become part of it to see what it really was. To see who was running it and why. You don't take down a system like Corvus by screaming from the outside. You dismantle it from the inside, piece by piece, while they still think you're theirs. Isabel's composure fractured. He's lying. He defected. Gave them access to Micah's notes, his fail-safes. No, Mason snapped. I protected them. You don't get to twist the narrative. Not anymore. That was when everything broke loose. The hum of hidden generators kicked in, lights surged through the tunnel system, and dozens of hidden doors clicked open around them. Evan's heart dropped as figures in tactical gear began advancing, agents not in school security uniforms, but government-issue black. Corvus had grown beyond the school, beyond the district. It had gone national. And now they were cleaning house. Noah grabbed Evan's shoulder. We're out of time. You either expose them now, or they erase you forever. Mason reached into his jacket and tossed something toward Evan, a flash drive. Everything's on there. The original architecture, Micah's backdoor access, real names, real locations. You send that to the right node, it brings down the entire system. But you'll be hunted. Forever. Evan stared at the drive. This was the moment. The last decision.
It was more than a story now, it was a war for truth.
And he was the last person standing between manipulation and exposure. But before he could act, Isabel lunged. Not for the drive, for the trigger device in her hand. Mason tackled her, chaos erupting as the agents rushed in. Evan and Noah ducked through the nearest shaft as the world behind them exploded into shouts, sparks, and alarms. They ran through the corridors, breathless, dodging capture as Evan clutched the drive like it held his soul. Every turn brought them closer to the server room, Micah's secret legacy buried beneath the school, where it all began. But they weren't alone. A figure waited in the final hallway, face partially obscured by smoke and flickering lights. It was the guidance counselor, Mr. Rourke, the man who always offered calm advice, who stayed late helping students fill out college applications, who seemed utterly harmless. Until now. You think you're ending this? Rourke said, stepping into the glow of a flickering bulb. Corvus isn't a project. It's a prototype. We're already live in 5 other states. You destroy this, and they'll still move forward. But if you join us, Evan, you can help shape the future. No more guesswork. No more chaos. Just control. Order. Evan stared at him, feeling the full weight of it. All this time, they weren't trying to erase emotion. They were trying to optimize it. Quantify morality. Reduce behavior to predictable patterns. Build a world that looked peaceful, on the surface, while silently engineering compliance beneath it. And he was the perfect test subject. Too emotional. Too curious. Too volatile to control, unless they could convince him to be part of it. He took a slow step forward, then another. Noah whispered, Evan? But Evan didn't stop. He approached Rourke, hand extended, as if ready to surrender the drive. Rourke smiled, relieved, lowering his guard. That's when Evan reached past him and slammed the emergency override button on the wall. The door to the server room behind Rourke flew open, and Evan shoved him inside with all the force left in his body. The lock sealed with a hiss. Rourke pounded against the glass, shouting threats, but Evan was already moving. He crossed the threshold, connected the drive to the main terminal, and initiated Micah's final protocol. The screens around him glowed. Data spilled into cascading rows. Evan entered the decryption key, one word Micah had embedded in every line of code. Free will. As the system unraveled, security logs exposed themselves, student profiles blinked and dissolved, and the root framework of Corvus began to collapse in real time. One by one, the agents' communications cut off. The algorithms that controlled the behavioral mapping fractured and failed. And deep in the core server, a final file opened on its own, a video message from Micah. He looked tired, older than Evan remembered. If you're seeing this, I'm probably gone. But it means you chose the truth. It means you broke the chain. Corvus wasn't just a test. It was a mirror. And sometimes, the scariest thing in the world is seeing who we really are when no one's pulling the strings. Evan's throat tightened. The room dimmed. It was over. Or so he thought. Just as he turned to leave, another file auto-launched. Not from Micah. Not from Corvus. From Isabel. A short, encrypted video. One that hadn't been logged in any known server. Congratulations, she said, her voice calm again. You exposed our project. But here's the twist you didn't expect. You weren't the only proof of concept. Look around, Evan. How many people helped you? How many were just bystanders? Who leaked what, when, and why? You were never the center. You were the trigger. And now that you've pulled it, we begin the real phase. The screen cut to black. And Evan, exhausted and reeling, realized the most chilling truth yet. They didn't lose. They wanted him to win. The school never reopened. Not really. Officials claimed it was under indefinite renovation, while faculty were quietly reassigned, their contracts voided without public explanation. A few news outlets picked up on the digital leaks, those strange documents that briefly trended on Reddit and YouTube, marked with the word Corvus and indecipherable code strings, but they were dismissed as just another online hoax, like AI-generated conspiracy theories or viral marketing for an upcoming Netflix series. The headlines faded within a week. The world kept spinning. And Evan? He didn't return to school. He didn't talk to reporters. He didn't even answer the 1,000 messages that flooded his inbox from random strangers who somehow thought he was the next whistleblower, the next Edward Snowden, the next truth teller who would go live on TikTok and expose the system. Because the truth wasn't something you could live stream. It wasn't dramatic or flashy or designed for content. It was quiet. It was terrifying. And it never really ended. Noah left town with his parents, relocating to Colorado under the pretense of starting over, but Evan knew better. They weren't running from something. They were trying to stay ahead of whatever came next. Isabel had vanished without a trace. Not arrested. Not exposed.
Just gone.
Mason, too, had disappeared. One moment there in the tunnel, watching the system collapse, then gone like smoke, like maybe he was never there at all. Evan searched for him, pieced together flight logs, burner phone records, even reached out to a few of Micah's old contacts he'd never met in person. All dead ends. And yet, deep down, he knew Mason was alive. Still out there. Still working the angles. Still playing the long game. For a while, Evan thought about publishing everything. Uploading the raw footage, the voice memos, the data files Mason gave him. He even drafted a series of posts to go live across every major social platform, timed perfectly to hit trending cycles, use SEO strategies, pull in views from YouTube Shorts, Twitter algorithms, Instagram Reels, all of it designed to go viral. But he stopped. Not because he was afraid, but because he realized that wasn't what they feared. Exposure wasn't the weapon. Awareness wasn't the threat. It was understanding that unraveled systems, like Corvus. It was the slow, creeping realization in the minds of everyday people that maybe, just maybe, the world around them was being shaped not by truth or coincidence, but by invisible hands that knew their thoughts better than they did. Corvus wasn't a machine, it was a philosophy. A belief that control was safer than chaos. That prediction was more valuable than choice. That data could replace morality. And that belief, Evan knew, didn't die with one server. He started writing. Not a blog. Not a memoir. But a journal. Private. Handwritten. The way Micah used to. He wrote down everything. Not just the facts, but the feelings, the doubts, the moments where his decisions weren't brave or heroic, just reactive and scared. He wrote about the fear of knowing too much. The burden of realizing your own story might be someone else's simulation. He wrote because, for the first time, he understood that the fight wasn't about ending something. It was about remembering. Remembering who you were before the world tried to edit you into something predictable. Something safe. The final page of the journal had only one line. Not written in his handwriting. He found it weeks later, tucked into the back cover like a ghost had slipped it in when he wasn't looking. It simply read, "Watch the sky on the first Sunday of June. You'll know." No signature. No explanation. But it was Mason's voice, clear as if he were standing right there in the room. Evan stared at the page for a long time, the ink still faintly smudged. He didn't know what it meant, but he believed it was important. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel afraid of what might come next. Because now he was ready. And somewhere, out there in the shadow of data centers and digital silence, Corvus was still listening. Still watching. Still waiting. But so was he. And this time, he wasn't playing by their rules. He was writing his own.